Tianan.
Vincent.
Can you
Open
hear me?
containers. Close containers.
Oh, no.
Open containers again.
Ah. Okay, sorry. Say that again.
Open containers. Close containers. Open containers again.
That's reopen containers.
There's a children's book in here somewhere.
There's also a Moms Against Drunk Driving in here somewhere. Mad. We're all mad. No open containers.
It's my favorite open container story. You win, Vincent. It's the best one.
Everybody, how's everybody doing today? Happy 11 a.m. Pacific.
I have too many Google Docs open.
Did somebody add an agenda item for me at some point? I did not add that.
This is the most mundane Tyler Durden situation I have ever seen.
I believe there is another Josh.
That is a much more realistic explanation. As for who signed me up as note taker, that might have been me.
I'm betting Lockie put a bunch of this because I think he asked for you to lead the meeting last week, Jason.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. In that case, let's actually get started. I was, sort of like lightly waiting for someone to. All right. Great. Welcome everyone to the meeting. I completely knew that I would be leading. Josh, do you have an update on documenting the generic scenario?
Indeed, I do not. But I saw there was a document where we were listing a bunch of requirements, and I don't know if it was Lockie or Nisha, but that was written down there. So I figure we can PR that in at the right time, or I can do it. I can just do it separately from that document. Yeah, okay. Here it is. So framework for discussions. I can't tell who wrote that, but that's, I can add that.
It was me.
Who? I lost.
It was me. I guess no one got that reference, huh? Liar, liar. When he goes into when he goes into the elevator, when he comes out of the elevator.
I heard a strange voice and I didn't, I'm sorry. Okay, I will add this plus the actual like the actual profiles for the different people into the repo. Does anybody have opinions on where? Is that a good README thing, or is that like maybe a separate markdown?
Nisha?
Yeah, so it's not visible here, but I asked the question if we were to convert the user stories into something that references Glenn and Larry, and Lucky suggested that we do that after we solidify the user stories. So
I see.
I think it is basically queued up behind cleaning up the user stories.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, Josh, I think it's useful to add to the repo. I don't think anybody has a strong opinion about where right now, but I'm sure someone will find one when you propose it. So, you know, after this, after we go through some of these user stories, I think that's the like main event here. After we go through some of these, we can settle on the general scenario. Does that sound right?
Yep, sounds right to me, and I can put that in the repo this afternoon or propose.
Cool. All right. I think unless anybody has a better idea, because I'm not sure how this is actually going to work in the time that we have here today. So when I went through it, I didn't look through it until like 2 days ago or maybe yesterday. And by then all the good ones had been taken. So nice work everyone for taking all the good ones. But what I think I was able to do constructively was to sort of start clustering them together. Some were like pretty obviously dupes, or you know, the same sort of user story from one from the producer's angle and one from the consumer's angle. And I think to me that just means they're the same thing with different as a blanks. I think it could be useful to go through them and try to cluster them more, or argue for why they need to not be clustered, or you know, sort of cluster or decluster them. There's a ton of comments, and I don't know if we will be able to get through any of them. Some of these don't have comments, and I think that's a good signal that we know that that's one we want. So yeah, I guess unless somebody disagrees, I think we should just go through them and see when the food fight starts. As a user, I want to store signature and SBOMs in a registry along with a reference to the container images it is for. This one feels like cheating, frankly. This is exactly what we're here for. So does anyone have any clarifying additions, edits, wording?
It's definitely a user story. I think we captured other places where it's not necessarily an image that we're adding a reference type on top of.
Okay, I'm going to make this. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm tempted to say leave it as is, because that is a user story, and it might just be a more generic user story that comes out of that as well.
Yeah.
Sajay has his hand up.
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
I wanted to probably give some backstory about the discussion that I and Lucky had about this. So one of the things he was roughly mentioning was that we stuck to start with containers and not go with something generic like artifacts, because it makes it a little more grounded, and it is OCI, which is Open Container Initiative.
Sure.
So if there is any statement or comments that kind of like pertaining to why we're using containers as the start point, it's just about defining the user story and just to keep people grounded in terms of what we're trying to achieve. I think that was an interesting takeaway that I had when he kind of mentioned it to me. So, but he couldn't be here to represent that point in the meeting. So I just wanted to share it with the audience.
Yeah, that's a very good, thank you. And absently thank Lucky also for that simplification. I think that's actually going to be, I will remove it from here and just make a general note. In some artifacts too. Okay, yeah, great. I won't bother going through and making all of them not say container image, because I think that actually will be non-helpful. Vanessa also had the same comment in the chat. Okay, As a user, I want to query the registry for signatures for a container image by name and tag. I think, yes, this was me. I think we want to, a few of these mention name and tag, and I think we should try to be clear that what we mean is by digest. Like I want to store a signature, SBOM, et cetera, in a registry along with a reference to the container image by digest would be my suggestion here. Does anybody think that we should support that? Not that. Nisha, are we voting or are we commenting? Nisha had her hand up first.
I was going to comment. Well, since a tag is a reference anyway, maybe a better description is just name.
Yeah,
or even repository.
I think you're a few things fall out of that for me. One is I think it's a useful point to note that a tag is a kind of reference, right? It's a single string, very narrowly allowed value pointing at a digest saying this means latest. That is a reference of like latest is this, or like B123 is this. I think that's useful to write down because I think it might be useful later. I think the name and tag tuple is intended to mean repository, image name, and optional tag where the default is latest. Is that how anyone else is reading it or not reading it? Okay, Brandon's giving me a thumbs up. You were also next in line. Did you also have a comment on that line?
Yeah, my comment was going to be that calling it the reference and tag. Yeah, that's kind of what I think we're going toward. And the user story is that they are going to call it probably more than half the time, as much as we'd like to everybody to deploy everything by digest. They are going to call it with a name and a tag or repository and a tag. And so that's the user story, how we implement it and how it gets implemented under the covers, that everything is going to be by digest or descriptors. That's our decision, but the user story is still going to be by the name.
Gotcha. I also agree with you. Vanessa had her hand up and then put it down, which might mean agreement.
So my comment when the early discussion was going toward, oh yes, we're going to be querying by digest. My question is, okay, what is the actual use case where someone has a digest handy? I mean, most of the time people have name and tags, but it sounds like we've kind of converged on the idea that we are doing names and tags. You know, like when I look something up, I don't know a digest off the top of my head. I know a name or I know a tag, and then I get the digest from that.
Yeah, I think what you're saying and what my comment was getting at and what Brandon is saying are all in general agreement, which is like the user story is I have Ubuntu at latest or Ubuntu latest, and I want to know what's in it, or I want to know what signed it or whatever. So that's the user stories. I want that, but the implementation of how we do that is not necessarily one request. Like it might be look up the digest, then look up things referencing that digest, and that's okay for us, which is good because that's probably what we're going to do. So yeah, I think we're all in agreement. I will add that text. Your hand is back up.
Yeah, this might be a general note, since we're talking about like actual user stories. Is this someone that is using the API? Are they in a web interface? What is going on here?
I don't think we have laid out which one it is. I think we should, some users will interact with this. Well, almost no real user will interact with this via API. Most will probably use a CLI or a UI. I would guess that the CLIs are going to be along the lines of like Docker type CLIs. There are a bunch of non-Docker CLIs for interacting with registries. UIs are probably going to be each of their cloud like repository host UIs, I think is the assumption. But I don't think we've like settled on which one that is.
Yeah, I think I was one of the few people that actually started specifying as a tool writer. to describe the person that's interacting directly with the API and writing some of the tools that end users would be using. And so there might be an option to add an extra delineation there in our stories, because I was interpreting user as like the end user.
Yeah.
Doesn't care about the APIs. They just want the data out.
Yeah, I think the tool author persona is in general in service of a user, is in general like a proxy for the user, where to some extent, like if it's possible to serve this user story with really complicated, really flaky, really buggy code, that does not help the tool author, but does help the user. So we should try to do it so that it helps both of them together. And I think we're going to. I think we all, as a room full of probable tool authors, we are not going to shoot ourselves in the foot, hopefully. Any more comments? Any more questions on this? I'm actually going to. I think I'm going to resolve this and hide discussion because I think we've agreed on that. John has a comment on the next one, I think along the same lines of name and tag. Probably same answer is people will look it up by name and tag to get the digest, and then look up the things based on that digest. All of which will be abstracted away by the UI or the tools in front of registries to the user. John, does that sound okay? Is John here?
I'm here.
Oh, okay, good.
It of course sounds okay.
Okay, I'm going to resolve your comment with extreme prejudice.
Do it.
Same thing, I think. Nisha, are you also satisfied with our general agreement point?
Yeah, this is no, wait, hold on. So this is different, right? This is querying the registry for not container image, but for signature and SBOMs. Are we querying by signature and SBOM name and tag, or are we querying by container image name and tag?
I think what I'm about to say is not authoritative or an answer that everyone necessarily agrees with. I think the one possible approach we could do to solve this is to say, if you as a user are interested in all of the signatures, SBOMs, et cetera, attached to this image, you can do that via tools, via UIs, easily and efficiently. That tool and that UI might make multiple HTTP requests, might make a request first to say Ubuntu :latest means SHA-256 ABC, and things attached to ABC are, this blob of things. But I don't think I think the only remaining ambiguity is around the name and tag phraseology. Brandon was next, but also I was answering Nisha's question. So if either of you want to go.
Well, I think I might be answering Nisha's question here too, which is if you're asking the other direction, because I think you said it perfectly for what we're doing for the down direction from an image to resolve all the SBOMs and signatures. If you've got an SBOM and you want to try to find out the image that refers to, well, that's the refer field in that object. And so you've got that data right there. You don't have to call the API for that. You've already got the descriptor.
Yeah, you might not have the tags currently pointing at that digest, which I don't know if you care. Like, it depends on the use case. Nisha, do you have, go ahead.
Just a general thing, I've noticed that a number of user stories are some permutation of this. Perhaps we have to go look at those before we come back to this one. I'm okay with, like, if someone wants to, organize their artifacts by SBOM, then they may want to tag their SBOM and then ask, I have this SBOM, what container images does it refer to? That's a that's a valid user story, and I think it is written I think it's like duplicated somewhere down there. I know how you want to deal with dupes, Jason.
In general,
Or-
if you find a dupe, try to put it next to its dupe, and we'll talk about it if we get to it, because or how they're not different or the same when we get to it. Brandon, go ahead.
I was going to say, Nisha, when you say that you want to find the container images that this SBOM refers to, are you looking to get the tags of the container images, or are you just looking to get the descriptors?
Just the descriptors is fine.
Okay.
But I would think that that's a valid use case where someone has an SBOM and wants to find the container images that SBOM refers to.
Yeah, I agree. At the risk of, I mean, we've gone through 3 of these and it's already 20 minutes in. So at the risk of completely derailing us, do we want to talk about, you're saying one SBOM referring to multiple images? How do we want to handle that, right? Like if there are Ubuntu 1.2.3 and Ubuntu 4.5.6 both contain exactly byte for byte ordering complete exactly the same SBOM, do I have one SBOM that points at Ubuntu 1.2.3 and Ubuntu 3.4.5, or do I have 2 SBOMs? Do we not need to decide now? Like, do we need to?
Are you asking me, Jason, or are you asking
Asking the general group? If you have an answer
Okay.
that springs to your head, by all means, share it, and I think that sounds fine. Michael also raised his hand. I don't know if Michael also has an answer to that.
Michael can go first.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was gonna say this kind of feels like one of the nice things about layer reuse, right? Is you can push the SBOM as a blob and have 2 manifests that use that blob and point to the various images that are reflected by it. Similar to like a base image or a base layer. How does that feel to people?
That sounds good to me. I don't know how anyone else. Go ahead.
So that is one way of doing it. There are multiple other ways of doing it. I think right now we are not talking about how we're doing it, but what exactly we want to do. So it sounds to me that this is I'm not really sure. I mean, it sounds like that's just the user story. I have like one SBOM. Let the SBOM describe like a Kubernetes application, for example. Maybe this SBOM wants to describe the microservices that are included in the Kubernetes application. So it would refer to, 3 other container images. A user may want that information. So SBOM refers to etc. container images. That's the only scenario I can think of.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time thinking of a scenario where I would have one SBOM that is pointing to 2 different images. I might have 2 different tags of one image, but I'm having a hard time thinking of that kind of scenario. It's possible. And so if we're thinking that's a possibility, we want to cover this though as a user story and have it there. And I would say if we need to solve it and how we solve it, that's more of an implementation, and let's push that decision off until later when we're looking at all the different possible solutions and say this is the quality of these solutions isn't important right now.
Sounds good. Vincent, what's up?
Yeah, I mean, without trying to contrive examples, the similarity in my mind bubbled up is like the way that people package like Debian or RPM packages sometimes, to where you'll actually build a single thing and it might split out into several different RPMs. And so like up to a literal point, everything in that entire build chain had the exact same provenance of like the sources that they came from. But then it's like and then you put open server, open SSH server in one box and open SSH client in another box. And, the sources that they were derived from, the build environment that those two binaries were inextricably linked to were exactly the same up until the point that you put them in two different boxes, where you might, attach, yes, they're arguably different, but the provenance of those two things was inextricably the same thing. So if there were a way that you could have it in like a CAS model or like a referral model, you could just say this digest of all the information and or source code about that build environment is literally the same for these two, items that came out the other side. So I'm not trying to like contrive an example, but in my experience, that's an exact similarity to several build environments I've had my hands in.
Yeah. Nisha, go ahead, but I think we should move on after this, and like Brandon said, like,
Yeah.
but go ahead.
What if those things that Vincent had spoken about, that scenario, what if it was described in the SBOM itself? Do we need references for this scenario at all? So suppose your SBOM has, so I'm an SPDX person, so let me speak in that way, in using that as an example. So SPDX can say, a package describes, Jaeger Tracing, and Jaeger Tracing contains Jaeger storage, Jaeger controller. I'm just spewing names out here, but the tracing is like 3 or 5 container images. There is no reference, like in this context, there is no reference to those container images, but they are described within the SBOM. And so tooling can read the SBOM and then go and inspect those container images. So in that scenario, is it needed? Is references needed for that?
Maybe not, if they do support that, but I think in general, we're talking about cases where the SBOM doesn't know that it's referring to a container image at all, right? The SBOM is referring to some jar produced by Maven, and then we put that jar in an image and we put the SBOM for that jar somewhere else pointing to that image or something. But yeah, I think I'm happy to put a pin in this and talk about other things and come back, because I think this might turn into a larger topic even than we've had so far. But we've in general agreed that the name and tag nomenclature is probably referring to a multi-stage lookup of these things. That's good. These do sort of feel like related, maybe not exactly dupes, but related, where I want to query the registry for signatures, I want to query the registry for all objects, and I want to query this registry for objects filtering by type or by annotation or whatever. I think these are at least a cluster of things along, like, I want to query filtering by type. Does that, I don't know, I don't think I'll necessarily call them a dupe, but like, do people also get that impression that they are tightly interrelated? Brandon, what's up?
They're all similar. The reason I was breaking them out in mine is thinking when we start to evaluate solutions later on, we might have some solutions that don't match all of them. And so being able to differentiate, here are the 3 out of the 5 that we'll get with the solution. It's kind of my thinking.
It was, I think, in so many comments. In one of these comment threads, there was a discussion about how many of these do we expect to have? How many should we design for having? If the query and filter by type is done client side or done by tooling that hides this behavior from the user, I think we can also say that satisfies the requirement. It's just pushed off onto tooling authors, but they're used to it. They're gluttons for punishment. But yeah, I think I take your point though, that listing them separately means that certain things will get more points if we were to use points to assign value. Certain things would get multiple points and some might not if they do need to be done on the client side or whatever. Well, the chat is once again blowing up. Filtering might be done client side, might be done server side, who knows. This one was interesting to me, actually. I think a few times we talked about most recent, and I was curious, I guess Lockie's not here to answer the question, but I think it came up in other contexts about when we say most recent, do we think that means when something is not the most recent, I delete it? Like a vulnerability scan result, for instance, for a specific instance of something that expires and is not useful when it is old. In that case, the vulnerability scan attachment workflow should delete the previous one when it adds the new one. And now you only have the most recent one. Possibly same for SBOMs. Probably not true for signatures. I don't think I would in general expect a signature to get deleted when a new one comes in. Well, maybe, I don't know. What do people think? You should be won the race.
Also because I put a user story in there that is related actually. I said most up to date or latest, and you asked, how is that different from pulling from latest?
Yeah.
And I think in general, there isn't a very good update story with the container with registries in general. Like registries don't necessarily support updates beyond, oh, here's a rolling tag. You may or may not be getting, updates through here, but YOLO.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask, but you raise a good question there. Do references help us with updates? I say yes, if you use it in a particular way, but that may be out of scope for this discussion.
Brandon, go ahead, and I will also join the queue.
Yeah, I'm thinking that this is going to be one of those scenarios where if we don't solve it on the server side, it can get very ugly for the users that are going to be pulling a signature for every, maybe 20 expired signatures and one non-expired signature, or scan results. Pick your choice of what people will be replacing on an ongoing basis over and over again. And so having something on the server side that can allow them to query this can cut that out. I hesitate though to say, put it on the person who's uploading that to delete it, because we're going to get into race conditions at that point. And so I don't know how much I just want to say, okay, yeah, whoever's uploading the next one just goes back and deletes their old one, if that's going to cause more problems than it's going to solve. Whether it needs to be like some kind of expiration time in there or something, I don't know, but it's just trying to think through those scenarios where you query, okay, here are the 20 artifacts on this thing, come back 30 seconds later, and all of a sudden, nope, sorry, your artifact's been deleted.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we solve that in a general case without having like enforcing type specific behavior or something that I don't want us to do. The nice thing about updating a tag for something, right? To go back to the point that a tag already is sort of like a reference, a very weak, unpowerful reference, is that when you point latest to something, it implicitly stops pointing to the previous thing. There is no like delete latest, create latest. You could do it, but don't for the race condition problem. I wouldn't want us to say, like, have the spec say that the vulnerability report type of thing can only point to one thing, and so you must delete it or you must update that, like have an update endpoint to say that it was this and now this or something. I don't know if we can solve it in general. I think the race condition issue is real, but solvable already by e-tags or other existing HTTP semantics that we should take advantage of in the registry in general. Nisha, what do you think?
I guess I still don't have an answer to whether that is in scope or not. Like, is managing updates in scope for this discussion or not? Because we've like focused on reference types specifically to refer to other objects. What does most recent or updates have to do with this?
I think that was a question for Brandon, so I'm going to let him jump.
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm lumping this into one of three scenarios. Whatever solution we come up with, it's either going to be pushed off to the artifact creator to clean up their stuff, to the registry somehow to magically do that deduplication and filtering out, or to the client to just download everything and filter it out after the fact. And I think it's up to us to say, given whatever we're creating, here is the best option with what you're going to get out of whatever we make of those three.
Yeah. Sanjay, go ahead.
Just in the interest of time, I think we all agree that as a use case, this needs points to kind of like go back to the previous analogy. Whether we solve it or not is, or how we solve it, we can probably discuss going forward, right? We know that there is a problem with ordering because somebody can keep pushing vulnerability scans on a daily basis or even like on an hourly basis, and the thing can just explode, and you want the latest without having. How is a separate question, but I think it's important as a use case to at least discuss it might be the thing, and maybe we won't solve it, and that's okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good way to summarize this conversation in a point so that we can move on, because I think it's something else we'll need to come back to later.
Three groups I had were the artifact creator, the registry, or the client pooling.
Okay, thank you. All right, as a user, I want all stored objects that reference a container image to be deleted when a container image is deleted. Here's a fun one, because I think the next one is actually the opposite, right? I don't know, and that all of that together says to me that we shouldn't specify it and should let clients and their registries sort it out, whether deleting an image deletes all the things referring to that image if possible or not. I think there's an argument for either case. Does anyone feel strongly that we should take a stand on this? Brandon,
do we have
enter
to?
the arena? Do we have to?
Do we have to? And by that, I mean, is this something that can be decided based on how you push your artifact up to the registry? If you push your artifact with a tag, it's not going to get deleted. If you push it without a tag and just a reference, then it would get deleted.
I completely agree with the sentiment that we don't have to decide. I think that the tag semantics is actually something we do get to decide, right? What happens if you tag a signature on an image? It's up to the registry if they want to untag it and delete it when the thing it points to goes. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. That's sort of strong behavior of the registry, but I don't think it's against the spec. I don't think.
That's taking, you're thinking of the reference tag scenario, right? So if we go with that solution, yeah, I agree with you. If there are other solutions out there that might have some kind of reference pointer in the descriptor, we might have more granularity there to be able to pick and choose between these two as the artifact creator.
Yeah, I think in general, however we solve this, I think there will be users who want both. And I don't think we can specify behavior for them because we don't want to pick a user. So even if it's a tagged, even if it's literally the like tag scheme that like Cosine uses today, we are in charge of this spec. We could say that things like this, even though they're tagged, get deleted. I don't actually want that, but it's possible to do it.
Yeah,
but I don't think we should because
I'm thinking of some of the other scenarios where the artifact is not necessarily tagged. And so if the artifact is not tagged, then we have the choice as the artifact creator of which of these two we want. And so we as the spec designers don't have to pick and choose between these two options. That becomes a user's decision later on.
Yeah, and even even embedded in that statement is an assumption that tags pointing to things has something to do with garbage collection, which is outside of OCI specs in general. So all the more reason I think this is like a third rail of decision I don't want to decide to make. Sanjay, go ahead.
I want to get the user expectation defined from this. That's what I think this is more important.
Mhm.
But if I delete the container image, will I be able to go back and get the references? That API needs to somehow come out as an implementation detail. But from a user story side, if I delete the container image, will my clients continue be able to fetch this or not? That distinction needs to be made. And whether we make it as, okay, delete references or keep the container image or somehow manage to keep the references, but the container image would be a separate thing. I can give you a specific example here, which is we've had challenges where customers clearly say, why is my space not going, right? How is that use case addressed here is what I would like to kind of like, that's where I'm hoping we can get some answers on.
Yeah,
If
I think to jump,
that's fine.
to jump ahead to how I imagine we could write this in a spec, we could say, you know, for example, when a container image, when the thing being referred to is deleted, the registry may delete all the things that only existed to point to that thing. The registry, it's up to the registry to decide. And it's up to you as the user to decide which registry behavior you want. You might be able to configure that on your registry. You might leave the registry that has the behavior you don't want and go to a different registry that has the behavior you do want. I think that's the best we can do. As an example of like, the registry is allowed to do this. You as a user, beware, the registry is allowed to delete the signatures pointing at the things that you deleted, but they might not. Does that sound okay?
I think that's fair. Do we see this becoming like, okay, I don't want to get into the implementation. I just want to be careful.
Go ahead. I mean, what's the question?
No, so I was kind of like trying to understand, like, if we had a similar concept of like, is catalog supported, right? Like the catalog API might not be supported in many registries, but the spec exists, and we reserved it as this is something that we want to do, or tag listing is expected in a particular way. So do we get down to the fact of there might be an option that we can, on a per request basis, tell what to do? Would that lead into something like that? Or is this use case about just saying that registries may implement this behavior? Is either way kind of like works, right?
I think I would like to reduce our scope. I think from the beginning, from the first meeting of this, my goal was to reduce the scope of this to something we could deliver and iterate on. I think one possibility is we just say the registry may do whatever the hell it wants. When you delete a container image, it's up to the registry. I think we can add descriptive, prescriptive behavior later, even before cutting a release of this spec. Like, I think we can iterate on it and say, like, if there is a delete with recursive equals true, or delete and references, blah, 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 that's something we can design later if we think we want to. But I think I would rather make as little change as possible, because Brandon, go ahead.
I want to expand the scope of the second one though, because I think you're reading it one way and I read it a much more dramatic scope, which is that you may want to set up a registry server that is separate from your other container image registry server that is just the security signature registry server. And then when you run your scans or when you run your image controller, you say, pull the image from over here and validate the signature from over there.
Sure. I think that is an entirely valid reading of that sentence. And so I will put my possible spec language associated with the previous thing, because I think you're right. I might be misreading. There is still the issue. I think we all have the question. Some of these other ones also pointed to the question of, should it be allowed for a thing to exist in the registry pointing to a thing that doesn't exist in the registry? Can I push a signature to the registry, but not the image it's signing? And I personally think that it should be allowed to support this case of having your signatures in one registry and your images in another registry, because I think that's something people want today. and because I might have a policy, my registry might have a policy, or some attached service next to the registry might have a policy that you may not push an unsigned image. And in order to push an unsigned image, in order to enforce that, you would have to push the signature before you pushed the thing. Unless we come up with some way of pushing the thing and its signatures or something. But in the favor of reducing scope, I would rather not design that. Brittany, go ahead.
I'm also going to add that we just approved the ability to have a sparse image index, a sparse index on OCI. And so an index that points to things that don't actually exist on your registry. And so that
Yeah.
just expands over to this side. So I think we've already solved that elsewhere.
Okay, great. Josh, go ahead.
Hey, I put this in the chat and I can put this in the doc too. We're going down the path of getting into very specific asks. And I think that's bound to happen at some point. I'm wondering if there are like, if this, then this, or a sentence pattern that we can describe almost all of these things to put it into a bullet list in the repo, and then we can move on from this and start to design the APIs that could enable 80 or 90% of the asks. Like, I don't think we can sit here and talk about, I want things that reference non-existent things. Like, that's one person's asks. Like, hopefully we can design something that supports 99% of the asks, but they're just, I don't think we're too early in the stage to discuss any specific thing. And so what I'm wondering, and I put this as like 4 chats up, can we describe this in 3 different, can each of these be described in 3 different things? I want to upload something to the registry XYZ that relates to this or is of this format or references this thing. I want to query, inspect, or view something in the registry that gives me most recent things, and that those become bullet lists that are grouped under that. Or I want the ability to automate. So this is like, I can determine that there are old tags, and so I can take this action. I think yeah, that's, I just, we're in meeting number 3 or 4, and we're already talking about several very specific cases.
Yeah, I think 2 things. One is if you, I tried to dedupe, I tried to cluster. I was a little conservative in my clustering because I didn't want to over cluster into like 3 points. If you think that's a useful grouping, by all means, take this list, copy it somewhere else, copy it later in the docs, you know, like put them into, I think it's a good grouping in general of like, how do I put things into the registry? How do I get things out of the registry? And then there's probably like miscellaneous. I know that we are 4 meetings into this group, but we're also a year into this discussion. So some of these have already come up in previous discussions, and I think a lot of the people have been a part of those. So I'm, you know, sensitive to the fact that we shouldn't go straight to solutions, but you know, we have to get to solutions eventually somehow. But good. I mean, yeah, I think maybe what I'm going to take from that is I was too conservative in my grouping, and possibly we could have grouped it more. But you know, there's an opportunity there. Maybe that's a good action item for next week. You don't just yourself do it. If you do it, that's great. I think I'm also going to do it and see how we come up with like the 3 main buckets of things or whatever, or 4 or 5. Yeah. We are now at this one, copying container and its references to another registry. I think this is an actual interesting cross. If we cluster them into 3 groups or whatever, with like pushing and pulling, pushing and pulling is already used, but like putting information into the registry and getting information out of the registry. When you copy, that is an overlap of those 2 things. You are pulling all the stuff you want out of there and pushing it over here. And I don't know if we should just think of that as a copy, as like a pull and a push that a tool can automate, or, you know, if that's going to be like a single bulk export, bulk import API. I don't think we need that, but I'm happy to design that if people want to. I think an interesting part of this is this quirk, which is a subset of the references. I think it was a thing I said to Brandon earlier, which like the client could do that filtering if we want. We could put that as the spec writers, we could put that work on the client that pulls everything, filters out stuff, and then pushes that subset that client wants. I'm sort of inclined to say that that's the best way forward for the spec, because that way the spec doesn't have to describe some filtering mechanism, which we're not going to do very well, or very, like we're not going to do as well as someone just unconstrained by the spec writing process. A thumbs up from Brandon. Nisha, you have your hand up.
So after listening to all of these, it seems to me that we're asking for a database-like operations on the registry. Is that what everyone else is feeling right now, or is this just me?
A database in the very general sense that we are storing and querying data. I don't know if you meant that specifically, like SQL database migration tooling,
Yeah,
which I don't have much experience with myself.
So I mean, there are the CRUD operations, and I think we are unsure of whether we will include all of those operations. But there are other things like joins, and that's the thing we want to enable, is the relationships. So we're trying to simulate joins, really.
Can you give an example of a join? I think I agree with you, but I want to know what you mean by.
So for example, we have a list of queries, and it looks like we are querying for a particular type of artifact. We're querying for a container that has a specific type of artifact. We're querying for all kinds of artifacts. So if I put on a database hat, that sounds like a join to me. That sounds like joins to me. And by that, I mean, there is some kind of tool or language that describes how to, like, the intent of the query, like what exactly I want to query for. So there's things like filtering based on the artifact type, filtering based on the relationship. I mean, I'm thinking of, yeah, I mean, I may be like over analyzing this, but that's what it seems to me.
Yeah, I think the filtering conversation definitely makes me want to do this client side, at least for now. Like, at least in the first minimum viable spec of this, I don't want to care about filtering at all by artifact type, by anything. I don't want to specify any of that. And clients can do that using whatever they want. They can join against another registry. They can filter based on what day of the week it is. I don't care. And then when we have that behavior in a client or some clients, and the client authors say, man, this was really difficult because the registry was too stupid to help me, then we can add those smarts based on real world feedback. Does that, Brandon's got his hand up. What's that?
No, I agree. I was going to throw a time check in there because I know we're coming around 5 minutes to the end. And this was super productive, so I'm not complaining at all. I would say that we might want to avoid, and it's kind of Sajay and Josh's comment, that we, I think we're getting a little bit into how do we implement this, where it might be easier just to take a step back and say, are these use cases that end users might want? And then, yes, okay, let's go ahead and pass and just go to the next one, versus otherwise. And that might be something to think about for next time.
Absolutely. I think we will continue doing this next time is roughly my guess. I think so far we haven't identified any that aren't use cases, right? Like none of these so far did we say, no, we don't want that. I think we just said, we don't want it this way, or this overlaps with this thing. So good feedback for next time. I think we will pick up and keep going, hopefully faster, or do it over another 2 meetings or something. But I agree I think this was useful, and we came to some general broad agreements, which I think I will document at the top so that it doesn't look like we didn't come to anything. But I think people agree for now, put more onus on the client than we probably want in the fullness of time. Things should be referred to by digest, but tools and clients and users can look up from name and tag to digest to things referring to that digest. Another one was don't have the spec specify deletion behavior, cascading delete or non-cascading delete. I think we agree on that. Does anyone else have anything that we've talked about that they are happy we agree on? I'm we didn't get through many of these, but in the hour we've been together, we agreed to like 4 things, and that's a record for a meeting of OCI stuff. So that's amazing. Yeah.
Personally, I'm very happy with our progress. This is amazing.
Thank you. All right, then I think we all deserve a nice break, and I'll meet you all back here next week to go through more of these. Have a lovely week, everyone.
Thanks.
By the way, lower in the doc, lower in the doc, I added some, tried to do more distilling, so.
Nice, thank you. I will also do that or amend yours, and maybe we'll
yes. Let me know if you don't think these categories are appropriate. But all right, continue in Slack. Bye.
All right. See you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.